aligned in this and you're trying to contort yourself to try to be in alignment about this. What else are you trying to contort yourself to be in alignment about?
That's Dr. Julie Bindeman, a reproductive psychologist who helps intended parents and surrogates navigate some of the most complex decisions in family building. And if you're considering surrogacy, whether you hope to become a parent or you're thinking about becoming a gestational carrier, there's one conversation almost everyone hopes they'll never actually have. But it's one of the most important conversations in the entire journey.
It's an uncomfortable conversation, and it's a hard conversation to have when you're not in it, when it's all hypothetical.
Because when you start exploring surrogacy, it's easy to focus on the hope, the excitement, and the possibility of creating a family. But part of protecting everyone involved, intended parents and surrogates alike, is being willing to talk about the hard things before a match ever happens.
These are unlikely to happen, but they are not 0%. And that's why we're talking about it.
In this conversation, you'll hear how Dr. Bindeman helps people approach these discussions thoughtfully, how she walks intended parents and surrogates through them trimester by trimester, and why talking about them early can help protect everyone in a surrogacy journey. So if you're exploring surrogacy and want to move forward with clarity, support, and confidence, this conversation is for you. Before we continue, I just want to share that in this episode, we discuss some difficult topics that can arise in surrogacy journeys, including complex medical decisions during pregnancy. Our goal in this conversation is to approach these topics thoughtfully and respectfully so intended parents and surrogates can better understand the importance of discussing them early. I want to dive right in. So, Julie, you specialize in reproductive psychology, which means you sit with people in some of the most emotionally complex moments of their life. Why do you believe that hard conversations belong early in the family building process?
So, just from a really zoomed out level,
Yeah.
most people who are having kids never have these conversations. And so it means that if they are encountering that life event, they have no idea where their partner stands on things because they've never had the conversation before. And thus it means that not only do they have to navigate, hey, wait, we might have differing opinions here, but do so during a crisis. So I like to have the conversations, and I frame it as these are unlikely to happen, but they are not 0%. And that's why we're talking about it. And let this be a spring, like when I'm talking to intended parents, I'm like, I want this to be a springboard for the two of you to continue having this conversation.
I
don't
like
need
that.
a final answer today, right? It's not Jeopardy.
No, I love that. And I think you're so right. I think that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily think about. And then all of a sudden, like you said, you're presented with this type of situation. Obviously, in surrogacy, the topic of termination is sometimes it's reduced to a single question on an application, but it's so incredibly nuanced. From your perspective, why is this not a checkbox conversation?
For so many reasons. First of all, given a post-Dobbs America, the laws keep changing quickly. And so knowing what the laws are in your state, but not only now in your state, in some places in your city, what the laws might be, can impact a whole lot of things. So it's an uncomfortable conversation, and it's a hard conversation to have when you're not in it, when it's all hypothetical. I have a lot of intended parents that are like, I haven't thought about that. And I'm like, I understand. And so I like to frame it for both just potential gestational carriers and for intended parents as, let's talk about what you're parenting capacity is. We're going
Mm-hmm.
to think about it in terms of this big frame, because there is no way for us to go through all of the complications that might arise.
Sure.
Because I couldn't even name a lot of them for you because I don't know them. That's okay. There are probably thousands, and like, okay.
Yeah.
And so it's let's get broad strokes around this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Oftentimes it's useful too to think about it as like, what is your capacity around quality of life? What is your capacity around quantity of life?
Mm.
And what would that be like? And also, okay, so if you know that um, you want to carry to term, I want to make sure your surrogate's okay with that too, because she's still taking on all the risk of pregnancy
Right.
and whatever else might come up in that. Could be stillbirth. It could, like, there's a lot of complications too that could come up just because it's pregnancy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I want to make sure she's okay with that. And I actually walk people through this. Like I probably spend way more time on it than the average bear, but I really walk people through it. I'm like, all right, so if something is found in the first trimester, and typically intended parents are like, well, but we have our embryos PGA tested, so we're fine. Nothing genetic's going to pop up. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
well, let's talk about that, because what PGTA does, and it's a wonderful technology we have, but what it does is it looks at your chromosomes. And if we think about building a house, chromosomes are like the wood part that just sort of shapes the house.
Mm-hmm.
And our genes are everything else that fills it, right? The HVAC units, the insulation, the walls, the drywall, all of that.
Right.
So yes, you might have clear chromosomes, but that does not mean that everything else genetically is fine, because we just don't know yet.
Right, right. Just, I mean, certain things haven't developed yet.
Right.
There's not organs yet. There's all kinds of
Right.
things. And I definitely, you're hitting on something so important, and I really, really, really want to get there. But before we do,
Okay.
one of the things, just going back to kind of that beginning conversation, I love that you've already, kind of touched on it. For egg donor and surrogate solutions, like, we definitely, like, preferences, they should be not only just thoughtfully considered, but
Yeah.
they need to, like, when a match happens, but they also need to be, as silly as it sounds, they need to be heard. Because unfortunately, there are situations in the industry where, there's people feel encouraged to maybe adjust their position because they're trying to make a match work rather than,
Yes.
again, fully
Yes.
feeling, like they're heard. When it comes to that type of situation, what do you feel like is kind of the emotional cost of maybe trying to convince someone to change their stance just to make a match work, or simply just to
Right.
hope for the best?
Um, Hard no on that. By the way,
Yeah.
like, hey, if you're not aligned in this and you're trying to contort yourself to try to be in alignment about
Mhm.
this, what else are you trying to contort yourself to be in alignment about?
Mhm.
So it sort of says to me, like, okay, very people pleasing, but should you find yourself in that situation, how are you going to feel? What is that going to be like?
Yeah.
And I've seen that, like, mid surrogacy, where lawyer had reached out to me and they're like, we need you to work with this surrogate. Like, sure, fine.
Yeah.
Um, there was this, like, they were watching something during the pregnancy, and it was
Okay.
nothing really finite, but it was something that the MFMs were like, we want to keep an eye on this. Like, we
Mhm.
don't know what it's going to mean or what it might look like, but we want to keep an eye on it. And as they kept on keeping an eye on it, um, the potential diagnosis and prognosis became really gray.
Mm.
And it was basically like flipping a coin.
Mhm.
And the intended parents had a really hard conversations with one another, and they came to the conclusion that we can't take this risk. We don't know what prognosis is going to be like, and we can't take this risk. And they were aligned when the contract was signed that she would terminate, and it was at the intended parent's discretion. Um, because there was a chance for the baby, because the prognosis was so unknown, she started to go through with it and she couldn't. She said, I can't sign my name in good conscience knowing that this baby might be fine.
Mm-hmm.
So, in principle, she felt one way, but in actuality, it was really different for her.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I would rather we be really clear on it. And that's why I walk people through, like, I go trimester by trimester.
Mm-hmm.
I go through whose decision is it if your health starts to not be the greatest, and the thing that would be the most helpful for your health is to not be pregnant,
Yeah.
but you're only 16 weeks. So how do we figure out that? How do we make those decisions?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And I think it's really difficult to be in situations like that because, like you said, every state and now sometimes even city or county, they all do have their own nuanced language. And it's
Yes.
sometimes really hard to interpret that. And so it is important to not necessarily just discuss this in broad terms. You do need to be really specific.
Yeah.
So, how do you, when you are going trimester by trimester, when you're
Mhm.
speaking to intended parents and surrogates, how do you create space for that nuance without escalating fear or having that conversation turn into judgment?
So I start the conversation by saying, okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm going to be Debbie Downer. And we're going to talk about some of the really hard things that can come up in a pregnancy.
Yeah.
It does not mean they will in yours, but they're not a 0% chance. And
Mm-hmm.
so ethically, I feel like we have to talk about it. There's no right answer. And it might be that this is something you two have never discussed before.
Mm-hmm.
And so let this be a launch pad for more of those conversations. Anything you tell me now, it's like you're not locked into it. And even in a contract, like the gestational caregiver is describing, she could make that choice because a contract can't control her bodily decisions and her bodily autonomy. Um, we don't want those situations to happen because then there's a lot of acrimony too. And um, I don't think anyone wants a journey to end up like that.
Right.
But I think it's also really important to keep in mind that, you know, she has to feel okay about it and what that might look like.
Yeah. We'll get right back to the show in just a moment. But if there's one thing we believe at Egg Donor and Surrogate Solutions, it's that building a family through egg donation or surrogacy should never feel transactional. For over 18 years, we've helped hopeful parents, surrogates, and egg donors navigate this process with education, transparency, and relationship centered support every step of the way. We believe people deserve honest information, thoughtful guidance, and a team that truly sees the human side of this journey. If you'd like to learn more about our agency or explore working with our team, visit createahappyfamily.com. All right, let's get back to the show. How just going off of exactly like what you said, it's essential
Mhm.
that we know intended parents are building their family, but like you said, the surrogates, they do maintain autonomy over, their body and medical care.
Yeah.
How can a intended parent maybe express their wishes while still honoring the surrogate's autonomy?
So again, this is why we have to have this conversation early on
Yeah.
because then we're clear from the beginning and it's
Mhm.
a beginning conversation that we can always revisit. Um, it's I hate the situations where someone checked the box that okay, this would be fine,
Mhm.
and then we get into that situation and actually know it's not fine, but
Yeah.
they never talked about it. And so no one knew how to bring it up or how to talk with one another about it. And so people then got entrenched.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is
Mm-hmm.
our baby. We get to make a decision. Well, this is my body. I get to, it becomes very, very entrenched.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, that, just that nuance, because I think, going back to kind of what you said earlier about you have PGT testing, or, the anatomy scan is another major milestone. But like you said, pregnancy is complex, and, it doesn't necessarily eliminate all of the possibilities, but we're still wanting intended parents to, and surrogates to have, that hope.
Yeah.
But you still kind of have to remain grounded in just the reality of the
Yeah.
medical phenomenon that is pregnancy.
Yeah. And I think we forget that because, like, the idea of surrogacy is okay, here's someone who has a proven track record. And what I like to
Mm-hmm.
remind both surrogates and intended parents is, but this person has never carried an embryo with this particular genetic makeup. And so it's not the same.
Yeah.
And maybe it's been a bit since she was last pregnant. She had her kids really young, so like been a bit could be fine and like still well within age markers. But yeah, like if you had your last pregnant at 26 and you're now 36 wanting to be a surrogate, it's still been 10 years since you've been pregnant.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think again, this kind of, all of these scenarios and things to think about, it can all feel so overwhelming.
Oh my,
And not every agency, not every clinic necessarily requires, a joint session, for example.
right.
But from your perspective, why is it so important that these preferences are explored, not only just each
Individual
individual, but
put together.
together,
Yeah.
rather than just kind of treating it as sort of a just brief, "Oh, okay, yep, you're good, cool, check."
Check. Right. Yeah. And what is always interesting to me is that some agencies will say, well, we handle the group part.
Interesting.
And I'm like, okay, well, what if a disagreement comes up? Like, then who's managing that? Or how do we get it to not just be that checklist? We
Mhm.
agree, we agree, we agree. Great. I think so much about the mental health piece when we're talking about third party feels very daunting to all those that are
Mm.
part of it, and maybe
Yeah.
unnecessary. Intended parents are like if we were able to get pregnant on our own, none of this would be happening. And so I don't
Sure.
understand why I have to justify being a parent. I'm like, nope, that's not what we're doing today.
Mm.
So really also being clear on this is, I'm not evaluating you for your fitness to parent. I'm actually not qualified to do that. I don't have background in that. So we're not doing that. You two have told me you want to be parents and this is the path you need to take. I'm good with it. So,
Yeah.
if you're concerned about passing, I'll tell you in the beginning you've passed. Now, let's go on to the other things we need to talk about.
Right, right. And then tell me a little bit more about the surrogacy aspect of that, because I think we do have a lot of, I shouldn't say I think, I know. And I know for me, the first time I had my psychological evaluation, I came, I was like, okay, wait, I'm taking a test. Are you going to think I'm like a wackadoo? What's going on?
Yeah, well, even if people have never experienced any kind of mental health issues, so they've never met with a mental health professional,
Mm-hmm.
and then like they're meeting with one, it feels evaluative, and it is. Like, I don't want to lie, like it
Sure.
is an evaluation. It is, and for this, it is an evaluation more about fitness. The
Mm-hmm.
way I describe it to people is, you know, if you want to be an astronaut, like people are like, wait, what? I'm like, I promise it will make sense in a moment.
Sure.
if you want to be an astronaut, you need to have a certain skill set. You need to be good at math. You need to be good at science. You need to be able to think on your feet. Your body needs to be able to withstand zero gravity where you're not vomiting the whole time. Like there's a lot of things that have to be in place. And there are a lot of people that work at NASA who wanted to be an astronaut and were unable to become one.
Mm-hmm.
So we think about like, oh, but if you talk to one of those people who are unable to become an astronaut, you're not going to sit there and be like, oh, really? You're just in control. You're like, you just manage the entire control room. Ugh, that's no, you're like, oh my God, you manage the entire control room. What's that?
Yeah.
Like you're very excited about it because it's a skill set. And so I say then I said, so here's how it connects. A lot of people think that just to be a gestational carrier, all they have to do is had a pregnancy before. Mm-hmm. And it's not as simple as this. I want to make sure that going into this feels good, and coming out of it feels good. Mm-hmm. I want to make sure that everyone, can be supportive, that you're going to get everything you might need, because we can't predict how this is going to go. And I say to the partners, you might not have a ton you're going to say today, and that's okay. I think your role is of the utmost importance because you're the rock, you're the foundation. Should something go sideways, you're picking up extra things around kids and the house and also your partner's health. So I want to be really clear, like you understand what can happen and that you feel comfortable with it as well. And I said, if it comes out that this might not be the right time for you to do it, or that, for whatever reason, you don't necessarily have all the skills, I'm not evaluating whether or not you're a good person. Mm-hmm. The fact you're even considering this tells me really clearly you're a good person. So that's really not what this is. And I try to be really like very honest and upfront. Like, this is why we're doing it.
Yeah. Well, again, that transparency and just that ethical standard of, this isn't just a checkbox, and this is something to make sure, like you said, that you, intended parent, surrogate, partner, feel good about everything that's happening. What do you think a joint session, might uncover that separate conversations might miss?
I think sometimes individually, everyone wants to put best foot forward. And if a potential surrogate is hearing something from the intended parents for the first time, she might have a reaction to it because she's like, oh, I was not expecting that. Yeah. And we then have time to be like, okay, so let's talk about it. Like, the intended, the other thing I say so much in the beginning to surrogates, but the other thing that I say is it's really important for you to tell me what you want. So many people who are meeting with me, they tell me what they think I want to hear. And I said, I'm not interested in that because, if a problem comes up, it's you navigating it. It's not me. Yeah. So if you're telling me something you're not comfortable with, but you're just trying to go along to get along, and that happens, it could have been avoided. So please tell me things because I'm not judging you. I just want to make sure that you are as good or better after the surrogacy as you are in this moment right now. Said, I want this to be a good journey for you. Yeah. Now, I'm not a wizard. And so sometimes people can seem great, not just in the interview, but I always give other kinds of measures too, because I don't just want to rely on like one thing or two things. I think that's really important if I'm really trying to understand someone. And it also gives me an opportunity to say, hey, where might there be inconsistencies? So that I can follow up on that, right? And maybe there's a really good reason for the inconsistency. And, maybe it was like, Oh, I didn't realize I was inconsistent.
Yeah, yeah. But again, I think you're pointing out just why the psychological evaluation is just as important than that medical evaluation that everyone is always so focused on.
And people will ask me, they're like, why does it take so long? And I'm like, well, you don't want me to rush this. And I think as time goes on, mine get longer, not shorter, which I'm like, but just I'm going into more detail with people. I'm asking more questions. I'm following
Yeah.
up with different things. Like just
Yeah,
plan for that.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. With how thorough you are. And again, you've kind of already touched on this, but you do say when it comes to, some of those tough conversations, you break it down trimester by trimester.
Yeah.
Why is maybe a first trimester scenario so psychologically different versus a later trimester one for all parties involved?
Yeah. So I don't know that it's ever easiest for the intended parents. I don't think that there is a gestational time where it's like, well, this is fine.
Yeah,
Um,
no, we can establish. Yeah, let's establish that very clearly. This is hard, period.
correct. Absolutely.
Yes.
I don't want to like minimize, oh, well, the longer you've been pregnant, the worse it is. Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I see that from the people I work with every day who have encountered some kind of pregnancy loss.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that like, no, that
It's just
I've
hard.
seen people who have had recurrent miscarriages in the first trimester and they're devastated and they
Mm-hmm.
are emotionally similar to the person who had a stillbirth at 39 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So like there are nuances. I want to be really clear about that, but like it's not a contest. This is not an Olympiad of like what's the worst situation you could get into.
Yeah.
Um, so I do it trimester by trimester and I talk about look, and the other thing I talk about when we're talking about this is how do you all manage loss? Like as a
Mm-hmm.
couple, how do you manage loss? What has been your experiences of loss? How do you manage it individually? How do you manage it together? And what might it be like? How might you think about managing loss with another couple? Because
Mm-hmm.
the four of you are sharing this experience different ways because everyone's coming at it from a different place, but you're sharing this experience.
Mm-hmm.
And working with gestational carriers in the past, they feel so guilty.
Mm-hmm.
What did I do? This has never happened to me before. Whereas the intended parents like, oh my God, I can't believe it happened again. Like we
Mm-hmm.
did everything we could to not have it happen again. So like very different places they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so like I say, like I can't tell you how you're gonna feel. And most of the time the carriers are like, well, I'd be really sad, but just for the intended parents. And I'm like, well, but what about you? And what about those hormone shifts? And like, are you sure you're not well, sure, I'd feel sad too for that. Like it's not like I want that to happen.
Sure.
But and again, I appreciate it's really hard to imagine a situation that you've never been close to.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, I don't know. All my pregnancies work out. I get pregnant the first time that I think about it. And, 40 weeks later, perfectly on time, which is awesome. Um,
Yeah.
but being able to also to put themselves in the intended parent's shoes and that empathy is the other piece that I'm really looking for too,
Mm-hmm.
is can you understand if an intended mother might be calling you more towards the end of a pregnancy or texting you more because maybe that's where she lost her baby
Mm-hmm.
and maybe she's really freaked out.
Mm-hmm.
And while it's fine for you to be able to empathize with, I'm going to give her some grace. Like, okay, we'll have these conversations. Yeah, it might be annoying. It might not fit in with my schedule in the way that I would like, but okay, she's really scared and hurting and it's coming back. And the thing she wants so much, she can touch it, but it's not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really scary. So just like these divergence of experience too. I think is
Yeah.
really important to understand. Um,
Yeah.
and again, like you're not grieving by yourself, you're not grieving with your partner, but it could be the four of you grieving together, three of you grieving together, two of you, like, the gestational carrier and the intended mother may be grieving together. I'm being so stereotypical, but who is it that's actively grieving?
Mhm.
What is that like? And sometimes intended parents want nothing more to do with that carrier because they're in pain.
Mhm.
And so it's not like but as a carrier, that how do you not take that personally?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
wow, we've been really working on this relationship and now like I just feel like I've been dropped. So how do you not take that personally? Or, oh my God, she really hates me because I
Mhm.
couldn't do this. And it's like, well, there are lots of reasons that this happened. None of them were you brought it on.
Mhm.
Um, and I talk to them about that too. So like if I talk about what might it feel like if the embryo transfer doesn't work? What might it feel like if it's an early loss for you? It's hard to imagine what it will feel like. Whereas the intended parents oftentimes are experts on this, unfortunately.
Mm. Mhm.
I like to also and just like you were saying, there are different things that can happen that can give us different information. So I actually walk through the testing where I'm like, okay, so in the first trimester, most likely you'll either have a NIPS and you'll have a nuchal fold, or you'll just have a nuchal fold. Here's what it's looking at.
Mhm.
Um, and because there's a visualization to it as well, it might not be chromosomal. It might be like there is a giant mass forming, and that
Mhm.
is not what we would expect to happen right now. Um, and maybe that becomes something in the next several weeks where it's like, oh, this is not reconciling on its own. Like this could be problematic.
Mhm.
Um, then to talk about second trimester, and I first go through like, okay, you're gonna have um uh a
The
different
anatomy scan
well,
and
even
yeah.
before the anatomy scan, it's like doing all the quad A kinds of things where you're
Uh-huh.
looking
Yeah.
at what is that nervous system looking like? What's the spine looking like? Like one
Mhm.
more check too. And things can come up there. Oftentimes it might be with that blood work, the first sign of potential spina bifida.
Sure.
And then again, this is where quality and quantity come into play. Because plenty of people have spina bifida. They live amazing, incredible lives.
Mhm.
Um, Also, there are others who don't. And so, really having to be like, we need to understand this and what this is. Then we
Mhm.
get to the anatomy scan. So, like, okay, so now you're like halfway through pregnancy. Like, remember that time from your own pregnancies. What might it be like? Because
Mhm.
this is the first time we can really see organs differentiated.
Sure.
What might it be like to learn that there was some kind of defect, that the brain wasn't growing in the way that it should, that the heart was wired backwards or wasn't closing in the way that it should, that maybe there's a club foot or and I'll go through all of the things.
Mhm.
And sorry, just to go back to the first trimester, I'll talk about Down syndrome.
Oh, sure. Mhm.
And specifically that I said, look, the grayest diagnosis that people tend to think about is Down syndrome. So let's go with that as an example.
Mhm.
Um, how might you feel if the intended parents wanted you to carry to term? What are your own thoughts about this too? So, because people have bias about ability and disability, and they do. And that is unfortunately a part of our world.
Mhm.
So again, it's something I want to know so we can be really
Yeah.
clear on that.
Yeah.
Um, in third trimester, like we can talk about stillbirth, we can talk about things that weren't found in the anatomy scan because they weren't big enough to stand out.
Mhm.
But if you're getting a 28-week scan, okay, this might be where we see something.
Yeah.
Or we might see something at 20 weeks and be like, not concerned, but let's keep monitoring it. And it
Mhm.
might be that 6 weeks later, they're like, oh, this has taken a big jump. Like something is happening and okay, we were not expecting this. So these are hard choices. Like in any situation, these are really hard decisions should they be something that occurs.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
almost a little easier to talk about it in the abstract.
It is. It is. And it is especially so hard to have these conversations because you are talking to a group of people that is desperately wanting to have a baby. And so the thought of, being in a situation where all of a sudden you have to decide is really difficult.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
will say, again, we're talking about all of the things that could happen. And in our experience, these situations are not that common. But
Right.
when they do arise, they do carry such an enormous and emotional weight.
Yeah.
But from the data that maybe you've seen, how often do these decisions actually arise in a third party, situation versus, maybe how often people fear that they might?
Right. So most agencies will say maybe we've had one or two in the existence of our agency.
Mhm.
That's sort of how rare. And particularly the agencies that have been around over time. They're like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is, I think like in my memory since I've been there, it's maybe been one or two. Um,
Mhm.
and so they stand out because they're rare, but they're
Yeah.
rare. I the estimation, because these numbers are not kept and there's a
Mhm.
lot of reasons for that, but that's beside the point. um the estimation is that 1% of people who have a anomaly, like it's 1% that might be terminating. So again, this tends to be the second and third trimesters that we're talking about. These are intended pregnancies that we're talking about.
Mhm.
Um, it is something that is extremely rare.
Yeah.
But again, I come back to just because it's rare doesn't mean it's impossible.
Right. Right. Why? And I mean, again, yes, we want to hold both truths. It is rare, but it is still worth that thoughtful discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you so much just for helping us approach this topic with such clarity and steadiness. These conversations are obviously not easy, but they are so necessary when they are handled so thoughtfully. They, like you said, they protect those relationships rather than strain them. Where can listeners just connect with you or learn more about your work?
Yeah. So I have a website. It's greaterwashingtontherapy.com. I'm on social media, but I'm probably not as active as lots of people there.
Sure.
I only have a certain amount of time. And so, but you can find me at Dr. Julie Bindeman on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, LinkedIn, all those places. And then you can email me through the website too.
That is perfect. And we'll have that in our show notes. Thank you again, Julie, just for everything you do in this industry and for this incredibly thought provoking conversation. I'm so grateful.
Absolutely, me too. And I can't wait for us to connect again.
100%. If this episode resonated with you in any way, I just want to remind you that this journey, no matter what it looks like, it doesn't always follow a straight line. There are moments that feel clear and certain, and others that are harder to name, harder to hold, and both are part of the story. At Egg Donor and Surrogate Solutions, we believe that support shouldn't just exist for the milestones, but for the moments in between too, the ones that don't always get talked about. So whether you're navigating a shift in your journey or just trying to make sense of what this experience means for you, you don't have to do that alone. Lean on your support system. Reach out to your coordinator. Talk to someone you trust. And if you need deeper support, there is real strength in finding a mental health professional who understands the emotional weight of this journey. You deserve support in every part of this process.